Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of SuperNova Commencements. I am your host, Kashi Sehgal, and we have, as always, an amazing show for you today. So today we are talking about politics or a career in politics. We'll try to stay away from politics itself, maybe. So today I want to talk about political organizations in our career powered by data segment. And that's brought to us by our partners at Steppingblocks. Again, they have 100 million people worth of data. So go on there, look at the skills, look at the trends for the industries you're interested in. It'll give you all the data. Okay. So I think you could probably guess, but the most common degree for somebody in the political organization sphere is a degree in political science and government. Kind of a no-brainer. There are 38,000 people about in the industry. Average age is about 37, and it's 56% female. So that's kind of cool. I love finding the industries that are powered by women. Top skills: public speaking, social media, and research. So those make sense. And social media is probably a newer one, probably wasn't always the case. And skills that make the most: coalitions, political consulting, and legislation. And we're going to talk about some of that with our guest today. Now, a lot of the people that work in the industry today come from a few different universities. There are all kinds of good ones, but of course, American University in DC is one. GW, so George Washington, my alma mater. Yeah, go Colonials. Number 2. And University of California, Berkeley. It's number 3. So just some high-level stats for you. Okay, so let's get to our guest today because y'all want to hear from her. Bring her on screen. Hello, everyone. Please welcome Rebecca DeHart.
Hi, Kashi.
Hi. So, y'all, Rebecca is CEO of FairCount. You may have heard of that organization lately. And past executive director for the Democratic Party of Georgia. So she's got quite a bit of experience in what we're talking about today. Will you start us off by just telling us where you're from and where you went to school and what you majored in?
Absolutely. I loved hearing those statistics because none of those fit my profile. I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I left Kalamazoo to go to college at Loyola University of Chicago, where I majored in social work. And so what started off as sort of a passion for helping and solving problems really grew quickly to something that really sort of brought me to the macro level of social work, which was how to influence policy and how to make changes not on an individual basis, but on a large scale basis. And that's what first took me to lobbying, and then later on into more political directed career path.
Okay, so let's talk about the political side first and the world of campaigns. How did you know that this world of policy campaigns, all of that, how did you know that's where you really wanted to be? How did you know that was the right path for you?
I don't think I did until I did it. I wasn't all that familiar with political campaigns growing up. I was definitely familiar with advocacy. You know, I was one of those kids in high school who saw an injustice and wrote a column about it for the school newspaper, so that was sort of in my blood. But I didn't have experience. My family was relatively apolitical. That wasn't something that I grew up with. I got my first job opportunity actually at the Democratic Party of Georgia in 2002. After I had moved to Georgia to work at the legislative session. And I took the job opportunity. I was young and fresh out of college and willing to try anything, and was really interested in where that might go. And I identified at that time, with that party. So I was excited about what I could do. And I just went with it. I just jumped 2 feet in, started off as a research analyst, quickly got promoted to a regional field director. And in 2002, it was a terrible year for the Democratic Party in Georgia, and everybody lost everything. So I also got a lesson in losing political campaigns, which it turns out over a 20-year career, I can say with authority that you learn more from losing sometimes than you do from winning. But at that point, I was kind of hooked. I liked how you didn't know what was going to happen every day. I liked the fast pace. I liked all of the different sort of skills that are needed at the table to make a successful campaign. And I got a little bit of a taste for when you do elect people that you believe in, what kind of change is possible. So I definitely did not plan on doing it. It fell into my lap and I loved it.
So you brought up a really important life skill, learning how to lose. How do you get better at that?
That's such a good question. And if you were a young Democratic political operative in the early 2000s in a red state like Georgia, you get a lot of practice at losing too. I think one of the greatest skills that I've learned and that I practice regularly now as CEO of a very high functioning and successful organization is to not be afraid to lose and to really cherish the fact that you do learn a lot when you lose. You learn just as much from a failure sometimes as you do from a success. And so then you know how to better approach a problem or a campaign or an issue in the future. This skill, I can't even begin to share how important this was during a pandemic when there was no textbook or guidelines on how to save the United States Census during a pandemic. And you just had to throw everything against the wall to see what would stick and not be afraid of some of it not working. It's really what made Fair Count successful. I think, having practice in losing is good, but you also learn to set the right expectations. Sometimes the process of social change, if you're working in politics, we're more often than not trying to look at social change, right? Like, because you see an ideal down the road. And the process of social change has so many different ebbs and flows. And you can't just not work on the arc because you're not going to win. I spent many years in Georgia knowing I wasn't going to win outright, but that I could notch away smaller victories that would help us get over the hump of that arc. So sometimes it's sort of like resetting your brain and your mind as to what's possible and what you can achieve. Maybe it's getting more people to turn out for an election than ever have before, even though you're not going to win. Maybe it's getting more people registered to vote. So there's a lot of different ways to look at success that sometimes aren't the ultimate outcome.
Absolutely. And one of the things you mentioned about taking these small little wins along the way to help shape an overall thing, you can do that within an organization too. So you can get a lot of smaller wins, maybe with like your coworkers or your team or your department or something, and help shape how your company moves or something like that. So that's a lesson that is very universal. Okay, so I want to ask about Fair Count. Y'all have been in the news a lot. What is it like working for a smaller company that has such a big profile? Usually high profile companies are like riddled with layers and departments and insulation from like all the things going outside in the world. So how do you handle it?
Fair Count is by far my favorite work experience of my career. We founded Fair Count in 2019 to solve the problems that were impending with the census. We participated in the elections. We're doing redistricting right now. We're helping people get vaccinated. It's all part of sort of this long-term non-extractive organizing model we have. We're founded by Stacey Abrams, who, of course, brings a level of attention to an organization that we just knew going in would be there. But we've also taken great leaps because we found ourselves working in certain aspects of the industry where there wasn't a lot of other people working, which allows you to sort of fill up that space and grow pretty quickly. For me, it's working alongside the most talented group of people that I have worked with in 20 years. It's all about the team when you do have so much scrutiny and you don't just have the pressure of performing at work like one would have to be proud of oneself, but you actually have sometimes the whole nation looking at you to see if you can solve or help with a problem. It's a lot of pressure to wake up to every day and to go home with
A
every
lot of
day.
eyeballs. Yeah.
Yeah, and just still be a mom or be, a partner to someone or be a son or a daughter or a friend. There's a lot of pressures that happen. And so you learn a lot about self-care. You learn a lot about teamwork and how to really do a better job at making sure that there's an equitable share of work and power and division. And then you spend a lot of time making sure that you're there for one another through those failures, through those successes, and through those risky moments where we try something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So moving into a little bit of your background and your skill sets, one of the things that you do really well is organize or operationalize, I should say, which is a big word. So what does that really mean, and how do you do it well within a political organization?
That's such a good question. It's one that I think about quite a bit when I think I might be dealing with a job change too. It's not a skill that I remember hearing about, that would be fulfilling in some way, right? Like one of the biggest secrets I have found in my career is just do the things you love, because I love my work. I feel very lucky to do it every day. But I didn't grow up thinking, gosh, I really like to put things in order and make the trains run on time and have A to B to C to D work, in a timely fashion. It's something that was a skill set that I learned on the job and that I found I was very fulfilled by. I mean, I joke sometimes that in another world, I'm either like a logistics operator, like working at Amazon, or like an epidemiologist or something where you just track things down with specificity. So it's a skill that I learned on the job that did give me good pleasure and that made me sort of move to the managerial track in my work as well, because it is a specific skill set that's needed if you're trying to operationalize a campaign where you have so many different things happening at the same time, and you need to make sure that they're connected with one another, that they're growing at a sustainable and equal rate all around. And so, yeah, I think it's a skill that I've nurtured and one that I've sort of stepped forward and been like, this is what I like to do. Two of my favorite jobs ever have been either one, starting an organization from scratch, like Fair Count, or two, stepping into an organization that was completely broken, like my former job that was on the brink of collapse, and envisioning what a new system could be and how to grow it in a way that if something bad happened, the whole thing wouldn't topple down.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that being in operations and being organized is essential to leadership? Or what do you think makes you a better manager, a better leader? How did you really prepare yourself for that? You have a huge organization, or have led huge organizations.
I think that's a good question. I mean, there's so many different good leaders, and I'm so lucky to be surrounded by different kinds of them. I daily get to work in the presence of leaders who maybe their strongest skills aren't operationalizing things, but their strongest skills are big ideas, right? Those people are really needed at the helm of organizations. People who can build and sustain and grow, like I try and do, are also needed at the top of organizations. People with really good interpersonal skills who, can get buy-in, not just from, the public, but from their own staff, to develop teams, to develop cooperation and working together. Those types of people are really needed at the top as well. So I think it's important to be able to operationalize and to build. I would imagine it is very much in the business world, if you were to compare some of the things that I do to that, but it's not the only skill set that's needed. So I think even greater than the skill for operationalizing is realizing what's missing from the table, what glue is missing if you don't bring all of those skills to the table to make sure that you're filling those voids with other people.
That's a good way of putting it. What glue is missing? I like that. Because, yeah, the leader is the person that brings it all together, or should be. And there can be lots of different leaders in an organization. They don't have the same power or look the same. So, all right. So let's talk about Fair Count a little bit more. You guys are doing some really important work. You touched on vaccines and the census and voting and all the things. Can you tell us just a little bit more about the organization itself? And then in terms of voting rights, why does it seem like they're more in jeopardy now more than ever when we see citizens more informed? We see more conscious capitalism. There seems to be more access to information. Why are we having such issues now?
Yeah, great questions. So Fair Count was started in 2019 by me and Dr. Janine Abrams-McLean, who is a former PhD in evolutionary biology, who is on the front lines of the CDC. And she and I sort of married this electoral process data-centered way of being on the front lines of democracy, like she was at public health, and to try and ensure that we had a fair and accurate census in 2020, but then to also use all the different catalysts, or to use all the different iterations of civic engagement as catalysts for long-term participation. So we really operate on the knowledge of there are certain communities in the United States that are undercounted massively over and over again in every census. These are the same communities that are often the ones who face voter suppression or who face voter disenfranchisement for a variety of reasons. These are the same communities whose districts are ripped apart in redistricting to ensure that they don't have a voice representing them at various body politics throughout, the different levels of the political world. And that we learned very quickly this year are the same communities that don't have equal access to vaccine distribution or to accurate COVID recovery information. It's almost like you could lay a map of communities over one another. And particularly in the Deep South where we work specifically in rural communities, heavily in African American, Latinx, Native American communities, where the franchise has been stolen in so many different ways from people over time, as and this kind of speaks to the voter suppression question, as a weapon of sort of systematic abuse to keep people from participating, to keep certain people out of power. I think the census happens every 10 years, but it is sort of the epicenter of all of our democracy. Everything is based on a fair and accurate count, because when you're not counted, you don't exist. And the census is about money and power. The census is what directs $1.5 trillion every year to communities. And if you're not counted, you don't get that money. And if you're not counted, you don't get drawn into political power structures through redistricting. So it really all comes down to money and power, which I think leads to some of the voter suppression issues. We are at an absolute inflection point in the nation, where fires of mistrust for elections have been stoked for partisan gain, where truths are trampled upon because they don't fit the narrative that some people want them to fit for partisan gain, and where people, as you said, who have more knowledge, more power, more everything they need to be able to access and cast their votes, did so in record ways in states that weren't used to seeing them vote that way, like in Georgia. Record number of Black turnout, record number of young people, record number of Latinx, record number of AAPI communities. When the powers that be did not like the outcome of the election, and so have tried to shift the laws to make it harder for certain people to vote again. And so this goes to me and to Fair Count, which is a nonpartisan organization. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We don't care about who you're going to vote for. We believe it is your right, your constitutional right, to go and cast that ballot. And that democracy is stronger when all people participate. So we feel very strongly that those types of efforts to make voting harder or that could, create things like long lines or, whatever it may be to make it more difficult to actually sort of like maintain your enthusiasm to vote and to make sure that it gets counted. Anything that stands in the way of that, we're going to fight against.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I want to talk about, which is sort of related to what you were saying in a different way, is lobbying. And I know that you have had a background in lobbying. You really understand how it works. Okay, so what are the pros and cons, I guess, first of all? How do you get into a job like this? And how do you think that has played a part in everything you just talked about?
Yeah, I can tell you that beyond campaigns, the last thing I thought I would ever be growing up was a lobbyist, right? That's like a loaded term of what people think who lobbyists are and what they do. So I got into it because I was a social worker in Chicago working in domestic violence. I was working as an advocate for a couple. It was a same-sex couple, two women. One of the partners nearly killed the other partner. I went to court with her, and the judge threw it out and said that there couldn't be domestic violence between two women, called it a cat fight, and dismissed the case. And I talked to a friend in Chicago. I was, livid. I didn't understand. I was like 22 years old. How does this happen? This is so unjust. How does somebody like that get elected to judge? How can there be laws that allow something like that to stand? Like, I was ready to fight anything to figure out how this could happen. And she said, well, you should call my mom. She's a lobbyist down in Georgia, and one of her clients is the Network Against Domestic Violence. And so I called her. She soon became my mentor, Sue Leska Hamilton. She invited me to come down and intern with her across the country at the legislature to learn how it happened. It turns out she was a contract lobbyist who had about 14 clients of all sort of different social justice sort of bents. And that was my first foray into it. I had never even stepped inside a Capitol building before in my life until the day that I showed up from work across the country in the South, which I was unfamiliar with. And I loved it. It's very process oriented. I found out that lobbyists are not just the people in like the alligator shoes with the really fancy briefcases that are whining and dining people, but that there are people there that are actually watching out for issues that are really important to me and to you and to everyone, and trying to do their best in representing their industry or their advocacy to tell legislators what are going to be the pros and cons of a particular bill, or to bring solutions to legislators to pass something to help deal with issues that we all care about. And so I found a pretty stark contrast between those that really saw themselves more as advocates and those that saw themselves more as lobbyists. And also because legislatures are made of people. We all know people who have been elected, and they're definitely not experts on everything, and we can't expect them to be. So sometimes they need to surround themselves with people who are experts. So that's how I fell into lobbying. I worked with her for a couple of sessions. I became the director of the Commission on Family Violence here in Georgia and was the lobbyist for the state for families for a couple of years. And then I went to the trial lawyers and did lobbying with them. And then when Sue retired, I actually took over her business. So I capped off at 13 years under the Gold Dome. The pros and cons that you asked for were, one, you're inside the room. You see how decisions are made. You see how people bring different information to influence policy outcomes. And you see who's susceptible to which kind of information. I mean, it's really sort of this inside glimpse that's not always pretty, but sometimes glorious about how policy is made. You can be involved, like in 2002, my first year, where we were the lobbying firm for the anti-predatory lenders, where we passed the strongest bill against anti-predatory lending in the nation. And I can't even begin to tell you what that feels like to be a part of such a macro process to make change for good for so many people. And then, I spent years as a lobbyist for reproductive health care for women in a state that tried to diminish and tear it apart year after year. And it felt like banging my head against a brick wall. And it was difficult and painful and filled with a lot of loss and a lot of struggle. So, it really all depends who you're lobbying for. If you're part of a firm where you're just kind of assigned, you're going to represent these companies or these clients, or if you're out there because these are the issues you really care about and you're working in those, there's all different ways to look at it. But everything that I learned in that, from the people skills to how policy is made, to how to keep yourself organized, to actually knowing that sometimes just by knowing the system or the rules of the game can actually mean the difference between winning or losing and nothing much else, were really big life lessons for me that I carry with me in all the jobs I have.
Yeah. So many things to dive into there, not enough time. So we'll do that at a later date. But one thing you mentioned that I would love to get your thoughts on, you mentioned that you took this internship across the country and you kind of made a cold call to someone that you'd never talked to before. You had like a warm intro. For students that are approaching summer, who are thinking about internships, a lot of people look within their town, their community, their city, driving distance. What compelled you to get on a plane or in your car and drive to some other location? You knew no one. How did you figure out where to stay, what to do? Like, how do you get through that process?
Yeah, that was crazy. It's been more than 20 years too. I wish I could remember some of the thoughts that were going through my head. Her daughter ended up moving to Atlanta too, so I stayed with her for a couple of months. So I knew one person who I'd gone to college with in Chicago. I think one of the craziest things for me is I grew up in the Midwest, in a relatively sheltered community. I think I had never seen a Confederate flag before, and I moved to Georgia in 2002 when that was the year they changed the flag. And so my first day of work, I had to walk through a crowd of people waving Confederate flags. I remember calling my mom and being like, I don't think I can do this. Like, this is crazy, you know? I remember going to committee hearings and hearing Southern accents for the first time. And if you're from the Midwest, where they all thought I talked funny and you were talking to people from deep South, you know, I didn't feel like I could even speak the language sometimes. I mean, there were so many things that were just so out of the ordinary for me. And I think they were both scary and exhilarating. I'd left my boyfriend, who we had an apartment together with in Chicago too. That was pretty crazy. Thought we were probably going to get married, ended up breaking up with him and staying in Georgia. So, I mean, there's a lot of different factors. At the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure what it was that pushed me over the edge, but I think an opportunity of come move to this big city that you've never been to before and learn how policy is made was just something I couldn't turn down. It seemed a little crazy. And I think about that particular internship too. It wasn't just to be like a cog in a large system. It was for me to work with the person who was actually doing it, you know, to shadow that person. And what an opportunity to be able to do that. And also there was a time limit on it. It was 3 months. That's how long it was supposed to end. I was supposed to go back to Chicago, move back in with the boyfriend, do whatever I was going to do. And instead I fell in love with the work and got job opportunities and just kind of chucked it all to stay. I think risk-taking has suited me well. I don't exactly know where in my life, you know, I've come. I come from a very middle-class background. My dad's a postal carrier. My mom works in reception at a university healthcare system. Like, there wasn't a ton of risk-taking that was involved in my growing up. But I remember leaving the trial lawyers and starting my own business in the biggest economic recession as well, and just being like, this might be crazy, but I found that my interest grows year to year, and that I have to kind of keep climbing to keep up with it and to keep fulfilled. And I think that that's sort of the end game for me. I love my work. I love what I do, and it makes me a happy person. So I kind of got to keep up with my own desire to grow.
Yeah, that's great. We actually have a lot of questions coming in from students about campaigns. So I think we should dive right in. I don't really know if you want to go into this, but Angela is asking, what is the reality of a political campaign?
I think that's a great question. You know, there was this movie that came out a couple of years ago, probably like 10 years ago, actually. I don't know if anyone remembers it. It had George Clooney and it had, oh my gosh, I can't even forget his name. The really handsome guy from from Canada. Anyhow, it was a political thriller, and it was this crazy thing because they uncovered like a affair or something with somebody at the high level of government. And I sort of walked away, was like, that was boring. Like that stuff can happen all of the time. So, I think that the reality of campaigns is actually like halvesies with what you see on TV, with the crazy stuff, because some people who run for campaigns do so because they have really huge egos or because they have something to prove. Then there's like people who run, for office because they want to make a change or make a difference. Sometimes it's a company. So you can find yourself around some really interesting personalities in campaigns. The hours that you hear about of campaigns are no joke. If it's a real campaign and it's hard, you're working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and there's usually always more left to do. I found that for campaigns and for people who love them, that's something they want to do. They kind of want to be part of that all hands on deck, give yourself over to this greater good for 4 or 5 months or something. They're nerve-wracking. When you pour that much of yourself into a campaign, you're not just sort of clocking in and clocking out. It's usually because you believe in the candidate or the platform or the change that you think might occur. And so you find yourself really kind of emotionally and spiritually wrapped up in a campaign as well, which can make the stakes feel higher, no matter if it's a win or a loss. Yeah, I hope I'm answering some of your questions, Angela, like of sort of the reality of.
And like, how do you? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say the other big thing that one should know about campaigns and working in politics is that it's not glamorous. When I was the executive director of the Democratic Party of Georgia doing, a $25 million cycle, I was also the first one with the broom to help sweep up after events, wearing my DPG shirts and hauling tables into a truck. Like, campaign people, the idea that somebody's sitting in a chair in a smoke-filled room coming up with these brilliant ideas separate from everyone else doesn't exist. And if they are running a campaign that way, they're probably going to lose. Campaigns are so hands-on. I ran a lot of campaigns on a variety of different levels. I rarely hire people that haven't gone and knocked on doors before and actually sort of paid their dues, gone out there, hit the pavement, made the phone calls, knocked on the doors, and really had some idea of a community of which they're serving. Because at the end of the day, the most successful campaigns too are not about the person on the ticket, but they're about the understanding of the community that's electing that person.
Great point. Okay, so let's see. Abby would like to know, let's talk about COVID. What is involved in managing a successful political campaign online in the age of COVID? And do campaign websites have a future?
Those are great questions. I haven't done the political campaign thing for a couple of years here now, but we definitely are doing, the campaigns around various civic engagement iterations. So I can kind of speak to it on that. You have to have an anchor, some sort of website. I think one of the biggest things that you learn when you go into communities, especially in the diversity of communities, is an understanding and an appreciation of the digital divide. One of the things that we work on a campaign is bringing people to a place that have not come there before for a variety of reasons, barriers, access, historical marginalization, etc. With the census, this was really clear to us. When the census was primarily online, what was very easy for us to fill out the form was very difficult when you don't have a computer or a smartphone, or it's a pay-as-you-go plan, or you don't have like sort of the understanding of how to fill out a form. I know my father is 80 years old, and talking to him on the phone to set him up for a Gmail account was like an all-day affair, And that's stepping outside of our comfort zone and realizing what's true for some isn't true for all. Where people, I think, that are in like sort of the core of social media movement and in the digital relational organizing and everything kind of see other platforms taking place for what maybe a stagnant, static website would be in the past. Those websites are still accessed by people who are a couple of years behind, these leaders in tech and digital relational organizing. So I think that there's always got to be some sort of multifaceted component in a campaign, because if you want your campaign to be successful, you need to speak to a variety of different groups of people as to where they're at. What was the first part of the question, Kashi? I apologize.
What's involved in managing a successful political campaign or any kind of campaign online, especially during COVID?
Man, be fearless and be ready to try everything and to figure out what works and what doesn't. You know, the census it was 2 weeks before Census Day when COVID hit. We had a big old beautiful bus, the same bus that Hillary Clinton, had been driving around, everything decked out in purple, fair count. We were driving all around the state, having hundreds of events, and we had to end it like this. And we had 2 weeks to figure out what to do in its place. We ended up making virtual bus tours. We ended up doing all this online content. We ended up exploring new digital relational tools and seeing how we could use them in different ways. We ended up changing the definition of a campaign volunteer because nobody could come and do anything for us. Sure, they could phone bank or text message, but even attending an event sort of classified them as a volunteer then because they were an information sharer. So I think a lot of it was figuring out what worked, what didn't. We did a lot of content online that blew me away when we had 15,000 views, for one little event. We had some content where pretty much it was just the staff that was on, and that's okay because you sort of like learn what works and what doesn't work. And then we had to think outside of the box quite a bit too. One of my favorite things we did is, we had this bus where we were going down to towns and we had hired local DJs and we had cookouts and we were doing, these great programs in this program that we have called Black Men Speak about being counted in the census and voting and everything. And those were done. So one thing we did is we looked at teletown hall technology and we still hired those same local DJs. And we first we texted people on a Thursday night that was like, all right, Friday night in Randolph County, we're going to hire this DJ. So everybody pick up your phone when you call us and put it on speakerphone because we're having a countywide dance party. And so we would text everyone. And then on Friday night, we would call them and we would play the DJ. And we'd also stream it on StreamYard via Facebook and YouTube and everything. And we would talk about the census in between songs. And we just had to get really, really creative to break through. And not just to break through online, but to break through the fear and sort of that how everyone was drawn to just what was happening to COVID. And that also led us to do a huge message campaign switch, tying the census to COVID recovery, because you can't fight people with what they're most interested in, right? Like all the content that was being consumed was like COVID, because there were so many unknowns, as we all remember at that time. So we had to find our way for us to fit into that rather than try and compete with it. And so it is possible to run a full online campaign during COVID. It's hard and there's no answers and it changes every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all that sounds very hard. So one of the things that you said, which I think is really important, is that you tailored your message. So your mission was the same and what you were trying to achieve was the same, but you looked at what was going on around in the community or world, and then changed the way you were talking about whatever it is you're trying to accomplish to talk about it in a way that resonated with what they were thinking or feeling. And that's such an amazing point. If you can learn that skill, that empathy, that being able to listen and reframe how you're talking about it to a way somebody else might hear it better, I think that is a skill that is worth developing for sure. So I think that's a really important point that you just made. Benson, continuing this like internet and voting and things like that, Benson wants to know, what do you think about internet voting?
Such a great question. I don't know enough about it to be able to say one way or another. I do think that there's got to be ways that we can make voting more easy and accessible going forward in the future. There's so many different factors at play you can see just through the fights of the online voting machines and the gold standard paper ballot and, all of these different things that we fought for over the years. But we do have to realize that at a certain point, we need to make sure that our systems in place aren't archaic for the people who want to participate in them. And so I think that's going to be a huge conversation going forward. I simply don't know enough about it to kind of say anything one way or the other, though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Maurice wants to know about working in a campaign. So he said if he can only work for a campaign for one semester or during the summer, how can he best stay connected to the campaign for a chance to work for the candidate once they're elected?
So I assume because you'd be going back to school in the fall or something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my greatest advice for a campaign is if you're going to do it, go all in, really become part of the team, really support one another. That's not always possible because you might have to have another job or you might have family or work commitments or anything. And I think that we're evolving as an industry too, where that's more recognized and realized. I think there's been a huge movement to unionize campaign workers and, kind of change like this structure of hours. But I still think even in the confines that you are able to do that, just be really present, be on time, be the one that raises your hand to do the extra thing if you're interning. If you're interning and you're not feeling your time, volunteer. Can I also jump on the phones with the organizers? Can I also go out onto the doors with the organizers? People who manage campaigns see campaign talent pretty quickly. People that show up, people that care, people that, are sort of are there. And then stay in touch. Don't expect people who are working on a campaign in the fall. Like if you go back in the fall, know that that's their busiest time. So like checking in and expecting a reply from a campaign manager or something like that is probably not going to be helpful. But maybe send a couple of emails just to let them know that you're following it, that you're tweeting it, or maybe you're having a watch party at your dorm or your apartment or something with others. Like think of creative ways that you can still be involved with where you are. Maybe it's a small dollar fundraiser. I don't know. There's going to be a bunch of different things. People will remember that kind of work so that when you do come knocking, even if there's not a spot with that campaign, I bet they'd recommend you for another one.
Great advice, because that's authentic interest. You can show that you really are invested in them. Paul would like to know about lobbying. So he said he's interested in lobbying, and how do I gain experience before I graduate?
Yeah.
So how does he find an internship or something?
So I don't know where you are, Paul, but if you were in Georgia, so I think it's probably similar in every sort of thing, call your local state rep or your local state senator. They often have interns that work for them during the legislative session. Or like here in Georgia, I think it's part of a class where you actually even get a semester off to be there for like the 3 months and you're a full-time legislative aide. Or right after you graduate, you can be a legislative aide that way. I would say most often or not, the path to working for a lobbyist usually comes first through being a legislative aide, because that's sort of like the inside way of understanding how everything works. And then you meet all the lobbyists because they come through your state legislator's door and they get to know you and all of that. And so then you can follow up with them. If you know of an industry that you are really interested in, and I can speak most specifically to advocacy side work, like let's say you're really interested in the human rights campaign or in environmental issues or in reproductive health care or, something like that. Going to the big organization that does that in your state, get in touch with the conservation voters or the Sierra Club, because they have usually a lobbyist on contract or on staff. And then they tend to do like advocacy trainings throughout the year that you can partake in. Make yourself known that way. Start asking those people, I really want to become a lobbyist. Can I intern with you? Can I do something with you? That's usually how things break through as well. Lobbying is one of those jobs, like you don't usually go on monster.com and see a job opening for governmental affairs. It really is kind of a who do you know, how do you connect? So it's a little bit more incumbent on you as the individual to go out and make those connections and to go to those advocacy trainings and to sign up for those different newsletters, and then kind of put your own foot in the door.
Good advice. Melanie would like to know what changes would make campaigns better.
Making it easier to vote for everyone. Giving more time to vote, early vote, having universal same day voter registration. All of the things that would allow campaigns to speak to voters and have voters still have the right to exercise their constitutional right to vote in the time before and leading up to election day would make campaigns so much better. There's so many things that would make it easier. I don't know if they would necessarily make it better. I think that the super PAC stuff has really changed campaigns, when you have all of this dark money coming in. And I remember the first time that it was like really big in 2004 with the Swift boat stuff with John Kerry when 527s first came out, or first sort of became a real thing. And it really has changed the political landscape. And it would be great if we could have a little more sunshine back in campaigns. That's just me personally, I think. But yeah, at the end of the day, campaigns are better, candidates are better, and voters are more engaged if there's less barriers for them to be able to access their choice and their will.
Yeah, totally. Okay, we're going to do one last question because we're almost at time. And I really love this question, so I'm going to pick this one. Brendan wants to know, are you planning to run for office? And if so, what are you planning to run for?
I'm not planning on running for office. I don't know if I'd like it as much, Brennan. That's really the end of it. I sometimes chide myself a little bit because I'm a big proponent, particularly of women running for office. And on average, women have to be asked 9 times more than men do to be able to throw their hat in. But I found at this point in my life, so far at least, that my passion is actually making the systems work on the back end, and I love it. I'm not a big, really need a spotlight. Very happy to kind of like do my thing and make change. I actually kind of like being a little covert about all of that too. Sometimes being the organization or the entity under the radar. If I were to run for office, I would probably be most interested in like higher office, federal office. And that's typically not a great pathway to run for office. Usually you want to start local and kind of work your way up and build a constituency base and like build trust and a movement to get to certain places too. So it's a very long answer to say no, not at this time. But that said, I have a son who's 7 and another one who's 2, and that would be a lot right now. And honestly, after COVID, I can't handle anything else crazy. But maybe when they're growing up, maybe I'll change my mind one day.
Well, hopefully that will be true, because I think we would all benefit from that, at least here in Georgia. Okay, so that is our time today. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.
I loved it. You?
Yeah, students, don't forget, please go to the website, supernovacommence.com. If you're not already, please sign up for the mailing list. We've got lots of cool opportunities for you coming your way through email. So sign up. All our past shows are there. You can find us online everywhere at supernovacommence.com. Next week, we have a lawyer joining us, Bharat Parthasarathi. He is Deputy General Counsel at Georgia State University. So we have had a lawyer talk about being at a firm. Now we're going to talk about within brand, kind of in counsel. So that should be interesting. Rebecca, do you have any parting thoughts for our students today?
No, just thank you for tuning in and great questions, and go out there and be bold. We got a lot of work to do in the coming decades, and I'm excited to see what's going to be done.
I like that. Be bold. Go be bold. And go have a great week. And remember, it's a blessing to be a blessing. So be kind to everybody as you go through your day today, and stay safe and healthy. We'll see you next week. Bye.